Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. On today's pod, we have Lora Jakobsen, Chief Purpose Activist at ZeroNorth. ZeroNorth is a technology company leading the green transition to make global trade green. By blending cutting-edge technology with human expertise, the ZeroNorth platform provides a range of software solutions that enable the shipping industry to reduce its impact on climate while maintaining commercial performance. ZeroNorth was spun out of Maersk Tankers and recently raised $50 million in capital to expand their offering. Lora and her team use data, thought leadership, partnerships, communications, social media marketing, and storytelling to drive industry transformation. Full disclosure, I'm participating in one of ZeroNorth's collaboration efforts for decarbonization within our industry. We're focusing on standardization. Lora, welcome to the pod, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
So I always start with this question. Tell us a little bit about your background and yourself there.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been at ZeroNorth since the beginning. Even before the beginning, as I was part of the team who helped create ZeroNorth. I was brought into Maersk Tankers as a person from outside of the shipping industry who had a background in successfully launching startups because I had several of my own companies and also helped many other founders launch their companies. Joining a new industry as strong heritage as the shipping industry has, I really felt like I needed to immerse myself within shipping to look at the challenges it faced in a new way. And that was back in June 2018. And by 2020, we decided to create ZeroNorth. Today, I'm the Chief Purpose Activist at ZeroNorth, and I lead the decarbonization working group, Impact Today, which you mentioned, which you are a part of, as well as head up ZeroNorth's communication, brand, and marketing.
That's really interesting, especially coming from being an outsider, which is always an interesting way of looking at things, right? You know, this industry is very insular, but I think as we expand, especially on the green side, but in other applications, having an outside kind of voice is super important. When you're talking about collaboration and you're getting collaboration amongst participants that are normally competitors, you know, how are you dealing with that? And jumping right in, how are you dealing with that? How are you finding that going these days? Because there is always an element of everybody being guarded, but yet there is also an element now. Actually, collaboration will help in the future, especially around green initiatives. Talk a little bit about that.
So we're a maritime tech company working with owners and operators to optimize their operations and bring value through the whole supply chain. Through our platform, we help them on their financial and environmental goals. So offering voyage, vessel, bunker, and emissions optimizations. Regarding your question, I think that's kind of where I bring in my experience as an activist and community builder, having an open mindset where you believe that collaboration is the key to driving change. And it fits very much in line with ZeroNorth, what we're trying to achieve from creating transparency and working together to help the industry because there's, ambitious targets for decarbonization. And I think there's a general consensus that nobody can do this alone and that we're stronger together. So I think that's sort of what's driving the industry forward right now as far as collaboration. And I think there's a strong efforts to make that happen.
I think you're right on that. But I do think, especially at a higher level, people are seeing that. But when you're talking about collaboration, you have to get, as they say, where the rubber hits the road. What kind of roadblocks are you seeing in your ways? Are you seeing people kind of being a little more cautious? Are you seeing, companies in general just still maybe a little bit on the old school side having a roadblock? And I look at an experience that I had a few years ago. I was at a Marine Money event. They were talking about sharing information. Now, not collaboration, but sharing of information. I was talking to a ship owner friend of mine and said, that'll never happen. Now, commercial information may be right, but there is a level of sharing information. And how do you bridge that gap of that general feeling? And this is a guy who I've known for a very long time, who's a super nice guy. I'm not mentioning names, but he was just like that's just not going to happen. This is pie in the sky stuff. How do you break that down and really kind of get people to overcome those hurdles?
I think actually we've seen a huge transformation in the past 4 years that I've, been in the shipping industry, where when I first started, I think we were kind of looked at, what is digitalization? How does that help you? And, people were keeping their data and themselves close to, everything close to their chest, and even Maersk tankers at the time. So we've seen such a transformation, and I'm not saying that it's completely everybody's open. I think people are seeing that they need to do something. How do we specifically help people with these roadblocks? I think it's about creating these working type of relationships where you're partnering with people because you benefit both from that relationship, and then your customers benefit from that as well. So how do you then say, okay, maybe you alone don't have as much data as you need to get all the insight that's necessary. But when you're on a platform like ZeroNorth that has a lot of partners and data, all of a sudden you have access to the benefits of the insight of, millions of data points. So that kind of helps open people's mind to sharing data.
Digitization become more, let's say, more a part of the workflow. It certainly helps in that as well.
Yes, for sure. I think so.
And we focus more on the E than the S and G, but are there any sort of other areas that you see where collaboration, and maybe in your time in that you spend in Maersk tankers, maybe it's something more on the technical side, or maybe it's on the S or the G side, but is there any other things that you could see where the industry will benefit from this kind of across the board collaboration where, people are working a little more transparently?
First and foremost is kind of the industry has data silos, and collaboration across that is going to help us break that down. As we look at the data that's needed to the way that people optimized and also sought to bring vessel performance to the level was basically a lot of internal tools. And there wasn't that many offering solutions. But as the regulations came in, all of a sudden people saw, okay, we need to reach this goal by 2040, 2050. How are we going to get there? And so the collaboration is amongst the, first movers, let's say, where they're ready to share, they're ready out there, they're joining, organizations like Global Maritime Forum, Maersk McKinney Moller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, Impact Today. And they're saying, okay, how do we work together? And so they're doing pilots together. For us on our platform, we're putting bunker optimization together with vessel performance optimization and voyage optimization. So that's one way, things are coming together. But I think you have to look at what's kind of driving that, the short-term goals of immediate emissions and then the long-term goals of our decarbonization journey.
And I also think something, not only are there silos amongst companies, but when you have larger companies and even smaller ones, there are silos within the companies. Over time, it's becoming less so, but the technical versus chartering versus operations versus even billing. And there's a lot of those silos of data. And I think that that's where some of that is the collaboration, even internally, but then of course, externally, sharing information, sharing performance information or port information and things like that over time is going to be very interesting. You coming from an outside, joining a tanker company, then spinning off and doing this. How has that changed over the course of the 4 years? And clearly the course of the 4 years changed for us because of COVID, as well as ESG, as well as a myriad of things.
Maybe I have the luxury of having grown up in Palo Alto, the Silicon Valley, where, the mindset there is definitely one of, it's my duty to change the world. So you have this kind of drive within yourself, and maybe, it's naivete where you think, okay, how do I actually transform something? For me, what about like the last dinosaur? That's referring to the shipping industry, right?
We're the last dinosaur roaming the earth because we're the last to kind of wholly adopt the digitization. Of course, you're looking at other industries before us. I think a lot of people draw the comparisons to fintech, right? Because fintech, there was a big uplift in fintech, and that kind of revolutionized a lot of things. And now people look at our industry as kind of the last fertile grounds for that change.
That's exactly why I'm here. Without getting all emotional about it, but I was like, what other opportunity is there left out there of an industry that needs to transform? And being someone who's part of that like really fires me up every single day. And that's what has kind of taken me through, this journey. And I think what you asked is like, what has changed? Originally, I came in to transform an industry, but then I've come to really appreciate it and I don't want to say love it, but it has a journey to go on. And we have to meet everyone where they are in that journey. But also now with decarbonization, 4 years ago, people weren't talking about that in the everyday life. And now everyone has a policy towards getting to zero. And there's so many companies out there trying to help with the decarbonization thing. So for me, that's something that I transformed into and I learned about, and actually just took, a climate emergency course at Oxford to help understand more of my role and business's role in the global climate emergency and how do we create a sustainable future. So for me, that was a transformational thing that, also is very exciting journey to be on personally.
My personal journey with shipping was, and I've mentioned this before, went to a college night. I lived in New York, upstate New York. Depends on who you talk to, if it's really upstate or not. I won't get into nuances of upstate New York. But if it's, for the most part, for those of you listening, it's either upstate New York, if you're from New York City, is anything north of Westchester. So we're just going to, we're going to go with that. So I was from upstate New York, and I found this, SUNY Maritime. It was close to where my grandparents lived. So we went to visit them, went to the college. I saw the ship. I heard about international trade. I'm like, that's what I want to do. End of story, done, dusted. And here we are many years later. I won't reveal how many. You certainly do need that passion. A part of the passion kind of has surprised you the most about being in the industry from being an outsider. And I love to ask this question because industry insiders always, no matter what the industry, it could be shipping, it could be the medical field, it could be Hollywood or what have you. There's always a kind of like a raised eyebrow to the people coming from the outside, wanting to change, wanting to do things. What have you learned about that just from the industry itself? Not so much from the technology, from the people, from the industry. What have you learned about that in your journey?
I mean, it's a super good question. Maybe I could just tell an anecdote of, when I did join Maersk Tankers, I felt it actually was at a time that was tough for Maersk Tankers because they had just had a big layoff. And here they were deciding to bring in a digital team and spend a lot of money on digital transformation. And they believed that was, what they needed to do for a competitive advantage in the future. But we were actually not really greeted very nicely at first. And being a person with a sunny disposition as myself, I would go over to the operators and say like, hi guys, we're going to transform, operations and optimize, tell me everything you know. And luckily, a colleague there was like, I've seen a lot of people try this. No one's been successful. The only way you can do this is if you really know the industry. And so he took it upon himself every day for like 4 hours for 2 weeks to tell me everything he knew about shipping. And then I went on a vessel and I slept on a vessel and I went to Mumbai, to meet operators. And I went to every conference that there was because I felt like I really needed to know it. And so the anecdote I wanted to tell is, I have a colleague now that was there at the very beginning. And he said to me, can you believe it? Now he's working for ZeroNorth. And he said, this journey that we started so long ago, and here you were coming in, and I was like, who is this person and what does she want to do? And he's like, now I understand and I get it. And it's like a really exciting place to be.
I think that's a shout out to the operator, but it's something that I try to do here at Vesana Q88 is to educate, especially my development team, believe it or not. It does a few things. One, it helps other people do their job. In that case, you do your job better. Right. And two, and again, I'm a big proponent as I love this industry and it just gets other people jazzed to be part of it. Right. So now you're like, okay, because if you would have had a lot of more people say, yeah, figure this stuff out yourself, then, maybe your journey's a little bit different, or a little bit more difficult when it didn't need to be. The anecdote that I like to tell people is I always remember that we start someplace. I walked on my first gig as on a tanker. I got what they called shoved down the hose pipe. I had my third mate's license, but there were no jobs. So I had to sail a year as AB. That's what it was. And it was remarkable because today we're recording this in early mid-July. I saw no less than 2 LinkedIn postings for third mates in openings. And I'm like, man, where was this? And I always reflect on this guy who sailed 20 years in the Navy and then 20 years in the Merchant Marine looked at me and says, I have more time spent on coffee break than you have at sea. Probably not untrue, but a little daunting when you're 22 years old, just trying to get started and wanting to bring, maybe not necessarily change, but want to bring some enthusiasm to the business. You hit on a really interesting point, and something kind of as we get closer to wrapping up, something that I want to ask is, when you were brought in, you mentioned you were brought in at a time they did layoffs, and then you had people say to you, and it turned out to be somebody who was an ally, say, I've seen this happen before and I see this fail. And I think the way that I thought you were going to go with it was, you're just going to digitize everything to take away my job. But is there a negative downside? I mean, this is certainly one of the negatives that people worry about. In other words, the rise of the machines, Terminator type thing. I don't think we're there, but especially with what your experience was of downsize and now we're going to digital. So am I really at risk? Can you talk a little bit about kind of your experiences there?
I think that there's always a suspicion of the unknown. Unfortunately, and so it's super important for us to be open to what's possible. I mean, maybe in other industries with robotics and of course the, autonomous ship and things like that. But I don't really see the digital transformation of shipping taking away that many jobs because, right now it's super critical, the human experience and knowledge to help guide. The technology that we're creating is not offering the ultimate decision. It's offering recommendation based on hundreds of or even millions of data points. So it's really still up to the master always to make sure that the crew and the vessel is safe. It's up to the operators to make the decisions from a commercial point of view. How do they optimize? And the tool kind of helps them do that. As far as the downsides of technology, I have to say I've drunk the Kool-Aid and I really believe in it. And I believe that it's transformational and really a good positive thing for the industry.
It's funny. We've had a few folks on podcasts that I dropped recently with co-founder of Windward, and he talks about he's talking about AI with deep domain expertise, right? And that doesn't come from a computer, that comes from people. And a couple of the other guests that we've had along the way said, the idea is human in the loop, right? You're not excluding the human. You are making that person the part of the loop, or you're taking away the mundane tasks and letting the person who is overseeing whatever that is. And I think that was Arthur Seaman of C Machine Robotics saying, I'll take away the mundane task. I'm doing more of the command and control task, the higher order decision making. And I think that that's where people need to get over that hump. And maybe that's part of the thing that some of the roadblocks that people see along the way is that, no, we're not taking away jobs. We're actually getting the boring routine stuff off your plate, and we're helping you make the better decisions based on, the data points. So
when we first started, ZeroNorth and pre-ZeroNorth, we were looking at the industry and looking at startups, and there actually weren't that many startups because you need a deep domain knowledge to create a startup in the maritime business. And you'll find that, now most of the startups actually have domain knowledge and have been spin outs out of companies. And the ones that haven't realize that, they're at a disadvantage because they don't understand the industry as well as someone does. And so a company like ours, which is trying to merge technology with maritime knowledge, is two different cultures coming together, but it's also a vast knowledge, camps sharing their knowledge and how they can help each other to succeed and help the industry to succeed. So I think it's a super interesting, merging of these two kind of industries.
With the influx of capital, what's kind of next you don't have to reveal all the super secrets. I don't expect that unless you want to give me an exclusive, but it won't be for like another month. All kidding aside, what's kind of, as you look out in the horizon on what you can say without giving away too much?
Yeah, I mean, the press release was out there, so I'm sure my messaging will be on the same with that. But I mean, in regard to funding, rather than it like changing our trajectory or anything like that, it's more about the investors, supporting and reaffirming what our strategy is and vision. And really that enables us to keep striving forward towards our goal of making global trade green. And I think it's like through these exciting channels that we're continuing on with, which is investment investments in our product innovation, expansion to our customer-facing teams, and also the pursuit of some M&A activities in line with what we're trying to do to data, products, and service our platform, really.
That sounds excellent. Well, as we get to wrap up here, it is summertime, and thank you for taking time during summertime. And everybody likes to, whether you're in the mountains or at the beach, to read something. Is there anything that's striking your fancy in terms of on your bookshelf today?
Yeah, sure. So I am reading The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton, and I really like fiction with strong female characters set in historical periods of time. So this book is set in 1686 in Amsterdam, which, is kind of at the burgeoning, time of trade, which is really exciting. And there's a young bride who gets a gift from her merchant husband, which is a miniature replica of their house. And then it turns into this kind of haunting, suspenseful novel full of surprises. So I won't ruin it for everyone, but I, highly recommend it.
I'm reading a book called Unwinding Anxiety. I try to do some mindfulness stuff just because it's easy to get over your skis pretty quickly with life and everything else. And this is actually one of the best books I've read in a while about this topic, because they actually have some science-based there's a lot of actual science-based facts in the book talking about anxiety, how it works, how it's actually a habit, how to break it as a habit. And I'm about halfway through. It's pretty interesting. And it's something I just picked up last week, I think. And it's pretty good.
Is there one tip on anxiety breaking that you can help us with? Share with us.
I think the biggest thing is to realize that it's a habit, which is eye-opening when he explains how the loop works. It's the reaction, and then you do this. But so once you kind of break it, I think the tip is to, as part of a mindfulness practice. And again, I'm no teacher here. I'm a student. Is that, being mindful of your reaction to things, like, why do I always react this way? Once you make that first step, then you can kind of not control it, but at least you feel it, and you can go, okay, this is how I deal with it now. And that's probably the biggest thing, is that it's a habit, and that you can actually learn to be mindful of it. And it's interesting. Now, I'm not saying anybody, there are people who, you need professional help, things like that. But for maybe on the low level type things here, this book is a good read to help out along the way.
And I have to say, being an American but living in Europe now for 8 years, I have kind of a way to look at my life before Europe, and kind of look at how the media actually played a big role in fear-based society, and how that's just not really present here, especially in Copenhagen or Denmark, where you are kind of tasked with taking care of yourself. Like, you'll go to some sort of monument, or, and you're hiking up a path and there's no guardrails. And you're just like, in the US, that would never happen because it's a litigious society. But here they're like, hey, go near the edge, you're going to fall, So I think there's some freedom by, living in Europe that I didn't really realize when I lived in the US. So anxiety tips are very good.
Well, Lora, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it. And best of luck to you. And we'll be chatting along the ways, and have a great rest of the summer. And best of luck to ZeroNorth on what they do in their endeavors.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really enjoyed being here and discussing it with you today.
That was Lora Jakobsen, Chief Purpose Activist at ZeroNorth. I hope that you enjoyed this discussion, as we covered her role and how collaboration can be a key element to creating a sustainable future for shipping. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe to all the places you listen to your podcasts. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Aversano. That was episode 10 of The Last Dinosaur, and I wish you fair winds and following seas.